Hey, welcome back to the next video in our series of videos on the off-grid system upgrades to our 2003 Class A Winnebago motorhome. In this video, we're going to be focusing on the inverter, the power inverter. This is a hybrid inverter that's going to be providing all of the AC electrical power in the RV when we're off grid. Our battery system, as you may have seen in a previous video, our 810 amp hours of lithium batteries are pretty much ready to go and get installed. But what I wanted to do first is actually install the inverter. It's going to be easier to work on it without the whole battery system in place. Before I get it installed, I wanted to walk through with you why we selected this particular Victron Multiplus II 3000 watt inverter, and what are some of the unique features about it that make it perfect for this 50 amp installation, and just kind of talk about some of the other challenges and options for taking a 50 amp RV off grid. We're going to get it installed in the RV and all set up and integrated with the electrical system there. And we'll get it all connected and we'll be up and running. So let's go ahead and get started and just dive right into why we chose this particular inverter. Okay, so let's get into some of the features of this inverter and talk about why it's unique. This is the Victron Multiplus II, and it's designed for a 50 amp electrical system. And in order to understand why or how this is significant for this type of setup, we need to talk about what a 50 amp system really is. And you might also hear it referred to as a split phase system. If you were to look at your power cable coming into the RV in a 50 amp system, you're going to have four prongs on your connector. And what's common about this and a 30 amp system is that you still have a neutral and a ground, but your 50 amp RVs are going to have two electrical inputs. So each one has 120 volt AC input coming in on each one of these hotlines. So this is typically L1 or L2. When you're connected to a 50 amp shore power, you're getting 240 volts that is split across both of these hotlines, so you get 120 on each one. So just think you got single and you got split, which is double. All of the circuits in a 50 amp electrical system in your RV are split into one of two sides of the electrical system. So typically you'll have multiple air conditioners, and you'll probably have one air conditioner on one side and you have the other air conditioner on the other side, because if they're both on one side, it'd be too much to handle and it would start to overload the system. So a 50 amp system can handle more equipment, but it's divided. So now let's say you want to take your RV off grid and you want to use an inverter that's going to take 12 volt DC power from your battery bank and then convert it to AC power. That's basically emulating a single phase type of electrical service, not split phase. But your RV is wired for 50 amp. So therein lies the challenge. So you want to take your 50 amp RV off grid, but you have some stuff and maybe receptacles that are on this side and some on this side. And what you'd really want to do is to be able to power the entire RV, if possible, from your inverter. But your electrical system's divided. And the way that folks have accommodated this in the past is there's three options. The first one is to actually have two inverters. So we got two inverters, both provide a single output, and you have one that's feeding one side of your electrical system, and you have one inverter that's feeding the other side of the electrical system. So that's one option. Obviously you got to buy two inverters, and they both feed off of the same battery bank though. Now the second option is to install something called a smart phase selector device. I think that's what it's called. So it takes one input and then it splits it across two outputs like this. Now that seems to work, but what I've also heard is that those can be problematic, and sometimes they fail, which is kind of a pain in the butt. So what I've heard is a lot of folks end up just taking that smart phase selector and just getting rid of it and moving towards a manual kind of an A-B switch, so that they'll take their inverter output and say, I'm just going to power this side, or I'm going to switch it and power this side. And they just kind of manually manage, where that AC power is being directed. That tends to work as long as your electrical system is laid out in a way that provides most of the functionality you need on one or the other leg. Those are the three options up until now that most folks would implement, taking a 50 amp system and using an inverter setup for it, because most inverters will only provide a single phase output. Now, what's cool about this Multiplus II is that it can function in both environments. So it takes a split phase input and it gives you a split phase output. So it's got 4 wires going in, 4 wires going out. And what it does automatically is, while you're on shore power, so your RV's plugged into 50 amp shore power, it passes through that split phase input, so that it provides up to 50 amps of 120 volt AC on each one of these lines, and it basically passes that through just like a normal 50 amp service when you're on 50 amp shore power. But when you're off grid, or when it drops to a single phase input, maybe you're running from your batteries, or you're on a 30 amp receptacle with one of those dog bones, then it will take that single phase input and basically just combine these in together, and they both will output 120 volt AC power, but just won't be able to support that 50 amp output, which is totally fine. But you don't have to rewire anything in your RV to be able to accommodate that. So this just wires into your power panel, and the inverter does all the work. It does all the work of detecting what type of service is coming in, and then it knows how to make the connection internally to support the appropriate output. So I'm not sure if I explained that very well. I hope I did, but that's what's cool about this, is that you can just use one inverter and then power the entire electrical system in your RV up to a certain limit for the current that it can support. If we take a look at the inputs and outputs of this inverter, you'll see what I mean. If we look at the back of the inverter here, where we can make all of our connections, you can see we have an AC in and an AC out, and they both have 4 connections there. We have a neutral, we have our L1 and L2, which are 2 of our hot lines in a split phase setup, and we've got our PE, which is our ground, our earth ground, and they're both identical. So in a really basic setup, which is how I'm going to have it set up, is that we have our input going into the AC in from our shore power or generator or transfer switch, if you have that, and our main output to our power panel in our 50 amp service is just going to come out here, and that's pretty much it. And we'll also have our battery negative and positive terminals coming in here and connecting to these terminals here. So that's the really basic setup. Now in this inverter we also have a secondary AC output, and that's just an option if you wanted to specify a sub panel or something that has specific circuits on there that are critical, and you wanted to separate those from this other output. You can control when that is powered or not inside the settings of the inverter. The inverter also has a lot of other inputs and outputs here, depending upon how you want to configure it for different types of applications. You can turn on and off certain relays and set it up for different types of sensors and things that you can plug in here. The main ones that I'm going to be using are these 2 communication ports here that are the VE bus connections, and those are like RJ45, like standard network type of plug connectors that I'm going to use to connect the Bluetooth interface and to connect it directly to this Servo GX module that I'm going to also install, and that's kind of a communication hub module that'll allow me to have this color display, touch display, and connect it to Wi-Fi and the internet and all that stuff to do a bunch of fancy monitoring. But outside of that, you can connect temperature sensors and different types of outputs and monitoring. I'm just going to go with the basic setup for now. By the way, this inverter is pretty heavy, so just so you know. Now I've already gone ahead and connected everything ahead of time because there's a fair amount of setup using the Bluetooth and connecting it to the app and being able to configure the charger settings. So I'll show you all of that later, but I've already got it tested here in the shop so that I don't have to do all that stuff out in the RV. So what I wanted to do is actually show you, do a quick little scribble here. So I'll draw a little diagram, and maybe that'll help you understand what I'm doing. Now this may not be exactly the same as your RV, and this is going to be how our RV is set up. So coming in to the RV, whether we have our shore power connection or our generator connection, now these are AC inputs, they're going to go into our transfer switch. So this is our transfer switch here, and we've got our shore input coming in that way, generator coming in that way. So either one of these is going to have power on it going into the transfer switch, and we're going to have a single output from the transfer switch. So the way the transfer switch is going to work, it's typically going to be on the generator priority, which means that even if there is power coming in on the shore power connection, if the generator fires up and then there's an AC power coming in here, the transfer switch is going to switch to the generator, and then when the generator shuts off, it's going to switch it to the shore power connection. But in either scenario, we're going to have one output going to our AC input panel. So this is our AC distribution panel where all of the circuits in our RV are going to be powered from, and that's how the system works. This is actually located towards the rear of our RV, and this is kind of by the entryway, very close to where I'm installing the inverter. So for the Multiplus to actually live in here, I'm going to install it kind of right here in the middle. So if we take part of this out here, you can kind of see that the inverter will actually go in right there. So this will be going into our AC in, and this will be our AC out this way. Okay, so basically I'm going to remove the AC coming in from the main distribution, and I'm going to reroute that to this input, and then the output I'm going to run some new cable, which I got here. So I've got enough length of this cable. This is a 6x3 with ground. So we have 6 gauge, 3 cables that are 6 gauge copper, and it has an extra ground. So that's what it's called if you want to go get some. So 6x3 with ground. And it's very similar to the existing cabling that's in the RV. So I'm going to run that from the output to the AC input. If we're in a situation where I'm either connected to shore power or generator, there's going to be an AC signal coming in here to the inverter. So in that mode, it's going to just basically pass that through to the output, and it's also going to charge our battery bank. So let's just say we have our 810 amp hour batteries here, and we've got our positive and negative DC inputs while we have shore power or generator, it's also going to charge our batteries. Now, once this kicks out, so there's no power here, no AC power coming in, then the inverter is going to be it's going to switch to inverter mode, and it's going to take power from our batteries here and then create AC power output. So that's kind of how it's going to work. It's either going to be in this pass-through mode, or it's going to be in inverter mode. So I think that's about as detailed as I want to get for now. I'm pretty much ready to take the inverter out and the cabling and start pulling wires and get this set up. I've already located where everything is, and I have a plan for how to hook it up and how to mount the inverter, and hope everything goes smoothly. Well, before I disconnect the power and get to work here, I wanted to give you just a quick rundown of what I plan to do. Now, I've already removed the cover for the AC distribution panel here, and you can see where the main cable comes in, main power cable comes in down here. We've got our two hot lines, and we've got our ground and our neutral, and you can see how everything's wired up. So essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove all of that and pull it all back to the point where I can bring it into the compartment below. So one more thing, before you disassemble anything, any DIY project, it's always a good idea to take a picture of it first. And you'd be surprised how often that comes in handy. Okay, I've got my my new cable run to the box. There was a very challenging couple of cable clamps behind the cabinets there that were obviously installed before the walls went up. So the mounting screw was actually facing towards the wall. So I actually had to cut those out. But got it all run and got my new cable here. Pretty much just going to wire it up the way that it was wired up before. I got my neutral, that's going to go in through here, ground to here, and I got my two hot lines here that are going to go right there. All right, got the main cabling done. Now I gotta just mount and hook up the inverter. So yeah, just a lot of connections that we already kind of went over. So I'm gonna go ahead and make those connections, and I gotta drill some mounting holes and things like that, and hopefully we'll get this sucker fired right up. All right, well, I got my power back. The inverter is mounted nice and solid here, and it's in pass-through mode right now. So I got my 50 amp electrical service reconnected back to the RV, and you can see here is my incoming line from my transfer switch, and I went with a blue wrap on the output from the Victron, so I can tell the difference between the two. But yeah, everything's working, and I already have a few cables connected to the inverter here so that it's ready to go when I get the batteries in. But one thing I did do is, I broke out my laptop here and hooked up this this USB VE bus adapter, and I needed to do that because I needed to disable the battery charging, because when I fired it up, it automatically wanted to kick into a bulk or absorption charge for the batteries, but obviously I don't have any batteries yet, and I don't want these battery cable outputs energized. So yeah, turn that off. I basically did that through my computer here and the Victron Connect PC application. So let me know what you think of this install and this inverter setup, and you know, chat about it in the comments. But next time we'll pick it up, we'll get rid of the old house batteries, and we'll put in that whopping 800 amp hours of lithium batteries in here, and get all the other peripheral stuff connected, and kind of get this part of the system wrapped up before we head on to the solar setup. But I hope you liked the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up, and we'll see you in the next one.